What's up? My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, martial artist, father, surfer, retired MMA fighter, and Kaju Kembo instructor. And you're watching or listening to the SGWA podcast, broadcasted from Kasai City, Japan. What's up? Welcome to Social Gelo with Angelo. I'm here with Tom McGrath, and I normally intro my guests before the show. It's like a 2 or 3 second clip, but Tom McGrath comes from Primal Radio. If you haven't checked out that podcast, I really recommend you do. And in honor of Tom, I have set up an introduction for him based on something I found on a website. So here we go. Tom McGrath is the co-host of Primal Radio. Since 2007, he's traveled the globe to train.
That's actually wrong. 2007.
I'm so glad I'm doing it. See, like in honor of Tom, I think I'm doing a really good job here.
No, that's literally a typo. I didn't do that deliberately, but it's 2017 we started doing that.
2017. Okay, so we're off to a glorious start. Since 2017, he has traveled the globe to train with the world's best martial artists. He's trained with Jim McCain, who is the host of Primal Radio. Again, I do encourage you to check him out. For all my Kaju Kembo followers, this is how I found Tom. I was looking for a Kaju Kembo podcast because I started getting into the Kaju Kembo side for my podcast, and his podcast came up with an interview with Hackelman. And Tom is trained with John McCain since 2009, if this information is okay. His credentials: he's an associate instructor of JKD and an instructor in second degree black belt in JKD Lungland and black belt in rapid harness. So, Tom. And I normally don't do any of that. This all has to do. Please listen to Primal Radio. You'll kind of get in a little bit on this inside joke that's going on. But Tom, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's a pleasure. This is like the first time I've ever been on this side of the mic, which is slightly unnerving, but also quite exciting.
Nice.
I'm happy to be here. I've listened to 3 of your shows, which I was referring to before we came on. One of the things I find challenging about podcasts is you've got this, like app store worth of podcasts, and the great thing is everyone in the world can now produce their own content if they wish. Every single person in the world could have a podcast. It's real easy to do. The bad thing is finding them. So I wasn't aware of your podcast, and you messaged through our website, which frankly no one ever looks at, and it's full of typos, as you've just pointed out. And so I listened to 3 of your shows just to kind of decide whether I'd bother to reply to you, whether I'd enjoy them, whether we might be on the same page. So I listened to number 5, where you were talking about martial arts and your journey there, and you made a real good point at the end about your obligation as a black belt to kind of continue to train and push forwards, and I had to challenge myself on whether I've done that, and the answer is I probably haven't. And then I listened to one on prostitution and feminism. I just couldn't help but be drawn to it. And then I listened to John Hackelman's show, which was kind of a comparison to see how your interview compared to our interview. It was kind of like, comparing dick sizes, basically. But I enjoyed them enough to reply, and here we are.
Well, I'm really glad you checked out that prostitution and feminism one. That was something else.
That was a really interesting episode, and one of the things that got me about it was not the purpose of the show, but you were talking about privilege. And that is a real interesting topic. And I have to say, as a white, straight male, etc., privilege is something that I'm not always conscious of. And I'd seen a video where someone, in order to illustrate it, they've got a load of people to line up. And he'd say, like, step forward if your parents are both together. Step forward if you were able to pay for your own university. Step forward if you, etc., etc., etc. and by the time he'd finished his list, some people in this race were significantly ahead. They had a big head start in this race or virtual race of life. And I found that as a very interesting concept. Yet I still find it very hard to think of myself as being privileged.
Yeah, I mean, it's a, and I know we're about to go into side quest. I love this though, right? Side quest. We are going to talk about martial arts. Don't worry. But yeah, I think it's interesting that, it's funny because like when I was doing my bachelor's work for my degree in psychology, they had us do the same exercise. It was part of the diversity training, if you will. And I think one of the roughest parts about it is it's one thing to use it as a tool in psychology just to get people to empathize with people that don't have the same starting point. It's another thing to grab it and use it as a political tool to make people feel guilty. And I think that's where we see a big issue on social media and everywhere else, is this idea where, okay, we do this. And I think there was a director that had a really good point. She said, this is not the oppression Olympics. Like when you do that and you line everybody up and some people are here and some people are there, this isn't about an oppression Olympics. I was more oppressed, therefore, this is where I'm at. And I think that's what I walked away from. Like, okay, yeah, we have different starting points, but it doesn't necessarily, you'd be surprised who you think is quote unquote privileged, but you do that exercise and it turns out they're actually really close, or maybe you're actually at a different point, right? Because you might base this on, it's based on different categories, not just race, right? It's also based on class too. So like
I heard once someone say that any argument that you have is all about convincing the other person that you are the biggest victim. And I think, like when you talk about the oppression Olympics, that is effectively what a lot of people want to do. And what do you do? What do you apologize for something that happened hundreds of years ago? What's the response, and how do you, if you train yourself to always refer back to this list of things that you're that are missing from your life, or if you, sorry, hopefully you edit this up. So if I'm talking at rambling,
no, you're not. You're doing great. Unless you want me to edit it out, I like everything. So
yeah, I mean, please do when I'm doing these kind of bits. I've become very conscious of the way I talk from doing the podcast and editing.
Not at all.
But yeah, if you're always going to refer back to these various like victimization things, or how do you get beyond that, and how do you become the kind of person that accepts those challenges and fights on in the face of them? I love Forrest Gump as a movie. That guy's got a lot of challenges and he keeps pushing beyond them continuously. Always gets me that.
Yeah, and again, right, that's what martial arts is all about, is being in a situation where shit has hit the fan in the worst way, but still turning it around and surviving, right? Getting through it through the right tools and the right techniques and the right practice. And I think that's where that's what I felt was liberating, right? We always say that in martial arts, don't be a victim. Don't be a victim. That's what we always say. If you're step number one, if you're walking down the street and you see that dark alley, don't go down that dark alley. Don't put yourself in a situation where you could become the victim, right? And if you do end up in other, outside that, you use your tools that you can to try to get out of it. And I think that's what that's what I think is interesting about, like, kind of combining the two concepts, if you will.
Yeah, my martial arts instructor is massively into the mental side of martial arts, and it's a side that I have, I guess, a partial interest in. But the growth, the direction of travel with martial arts is you start out at the physical and you end up at the mental. Or if you're in the Tai Chi world, you go the other way round. So you start and there is apparently, I've never seen it, but a very high level of Tai Chi where you're an excellent fighter physically. But I do think when you get to the higher levels of martial arts, it transcends your life and it becomes a lifestyle. And I don't want to sound like a sort of guru by saying that, but yeah, that is something that is an experiential thing. It does become such a big part of your life.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, and it doesn't matter what martial art you're talking about. So, it can be a hard style like boxing. Once you decide to take that dedication to say that, hey, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this well, and if I'm going to go pro, I mean, I'm not a pro boxer, but still, the dedication it takes to become a professional boxer, you can't be fucking around. Like it eliminates fucking around. Like if you were going to kind of dabble, you can't dabble in the professional boxing world. You can't be going out, staying out late all night, partying all night, and then try to get back in the ring and spar the next day. You're going to get creamed. So like there's certain things that happen, doesn't matter what the martial art is, where you kind of there's this mix that happens between your personal life and your martial arts life. And if you're really dedicated in your martial arts, it's going to bleed into your personal life, and it's going to change how your decision process and how you live your life. Yeah. So
yeah.
Tom, we're on talk now. We're kind of back on the journey. We're back on the journey.
Yeah.
As you can tell from the 0 questions I sent you. So in your journey, how did this start? How did you get into martial arts?
Well, I don't have a great origin story, but I'll tell it anyway. So my brother was into martial arts to a certain extent. So he had an obsession with the Far East, in particular Japan. And he did some martial arts. I think he did karate. It may have been Taekwondo. But I was literally off put by the fact he being like, a white gi and, wearing like these colourful belts. And I was at that stage where anything my brother did, I didn't particularly like, and anything, I did, he probably didn't particularly like. But we had like this obsession. There was like a local Japanese supermarket, or might have been Oriental, but I remember it being Japanese, and it had like a Sega World and things like that, which is quite a rare thing in the UK because we don't have a massive Japanese community. I don't think it's in operation anymore. But and my brother would learn Japanese, and he ended up going to Japan as you've done. He taught English for 2 years over there, came back, did a master's in Japanese, and he was on this tiny island near Hiroshima. It had like 2,000 people. Everyone was Japanese. It's called Okina, but there's no way, like even in Japan, people didn't know it.
Yeah.
So, and because he was on this little island where everyone was Japanese, if he didn't learn the language, he would have had a really bad time. So, he really had to get stuck in to make the most of his time out there. So that, I guess, that was my early thoughts on martial arts stuff. And I was far more drawn to something like boxing. I was massively into sort of 80s action movies and TV shows. Saturday afternoon would be things like The A-Team, Airwolf, Knight Rider, all these kind of American shows with like your classic hero. And then I loved all the films, whether it had Arnold Schwarzenegger in it or Bruce Willis or whoever else. But that was my sort of 80s childhood. Fast forward to my mid-20s, and I've still never done anything in that context. And there was just a free class at my local gym. So I was going to this relatively basic underground gym, Fitness First in the centre of London, which was right outside my office at the time. And there was an advert for a free class studying Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do. Now, I was aware of Bruce Lee just like everyone else is in the world, but not so much as a fan, not particularly aware of what he did and how influential he was. For me, it was like kind of out of date movies, 1970s movies when I'm in the 2000s. But through doing the martial art, I came to kind of respect him a lot more. And I think because JKD wasn't like the karate and the traditional martial arts that my brother had done, it was, we'd wear a black t-shirt. There was no like katas. We eventually, after some time, we introduced bowing in, and we started referring to my instructor Lak as Sifu. But those took a while to come in. Like initially we didn't have them, and I think we saw the benefit of having those traditions. And very quickly I was like, why haven't I been doing this for longer? Like I really enjoyed it, and there was a natural organic growth. So my instructor, it was his first ever class in teaching in London, so he'd been teaching up in Leicester in a kind of, I guess, assistant or apprentice instructor sort of capacity. So he'd come down to London, so we started with 1 class a week, we went to 2 classes a week. We kind of set up a backyard group, so we'd go and like kind of fight in the park and do a bit of extra training. Then LAC would start bringing over these instructors from America. Then I'd start going to America and training with these guys. And through doing that, I'd meet people from other places in the world. So I've got a very good friend in Belgium, for example. I visited him. I mean, the last time I was counting, it's about 15 times I've been to Belgium, just to go over and train with him. And it's actually real easy to do. When I first went there, I thought no one would speak English, and like everyone did. So real easy to kind of operate over there. And then after a gradual period of time, I saw skill gaps from doing JKD versus what my kind of peers had. So I'd go and train in America, and people would have weapon skills, ground fighting skills, locking skills. And all I was really learning with the JKD was like punching and kicking and touching upon these other subjects. So I took up a kind of 5-year instructor program with Rapid Harness. There's a bit more of a story to this, and I might delve into that in a little bit. But by the time I'd finished that 5-year instructor program, which was April 2019, I've been doing martial arts for like 13 years or so, and through I'm not going to say through like gigantic dedication, this, that, and the other. I'd say with anything in life, 80% of success is showing up. I can't remember who said that, but I had that dedication to keep going. And I guess put in those extra hours. It wasn't like I was an exceptionally gifted athlete or a natural at these things. Some things took me a real long time to get. I had a base of kind of physical presence from doing things like football, soccer, but I just I love the social side of it. I love the sort of self-improvement side of it, and it was just a natural growth in that direction.
And then all right, so I have a few notes here. 80% is showing up. Woody Allen once said that 80% of success is showing up. So there's our quote there. And my question, I can go on a whole rant about Woody Allen, but I'm not gonna. How old were you when you started? How old were you when you started? When did it start?
I'm going to put myself about 25. So I'm 39 now.
Oh, wow. So you started it as a man. You were a man.
Yeah.
Yeah. You started at 25 at a JKD place.
Yeah. I mean,
if I'm listening correctly.
That's right. It was a regular gym. And I think a lot of people, they certainly, and this is going back a little bit, but they would study a traditional martial art, in some way find it ineffective or lacking something they needed, and then move to JKD. Okay. And I've done the opposite. So I started with JKD, which I think is a rarity. And what Tim Tackett would say is that JKD gives you a lens to view other martial arts through. So because you're learning a principles-based martial art, and for those that don't know what that means, that effectively, rather than doing an endless list of techniques or a response to a technique, you would instead learn a principle, and that principle informs the way you respond to everything. So closest weapon to the nearest target would be one of our principles. So the idea that if I'm doing an entrance strike, so my first strike would be thrown off my lead tool. So rather than, I would throw a jab, for example, rather than throwing a cross as my first strike, because that distance and therefore less time means that I'm more likely to land that strike. So if I was like doing Kajikempo or anything else, I would then I would assess that martial art versus this list of principles in my head? I know you've done JKD, but I'm sort of spelling it out.
But I'm gonna put a really big disclaimer. I have not officially done JKD. I've trained with JKD practitioners, which is why I've been told by JKD guys when I've worked with them, they've wondered if I came from, and I did. I mean, well, it's not about my story, but I will say that before I got into martial arts, it was Bruce Lee was a big influence, but there was no JKD where I was. So I picked up a
California,
book.
right?
Yeah, I was in California, but where I was where I was in the town I lived in, I was 12 years old. I just got jumped. I was looking for something here and now. And in the place I was at did not offer JKD, and my parents didn't want me doing martial arts. So I picked up the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, started reading through the principles. At the time, I thought boxing was the best. I did a lot of boxing on my own because I wasn't allowed to train. But I was getting jumped by gang members, so I had to figure something out. And me and my cousin was big on the books. He was the one who introduced to me the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, and he now works with I believe people from the Wednesday group. But back then, it was just me and him fucking around with books, judo books, Tao Jeet Kune Do, and I didn't get into Kajikembo till way later. By the time I came in, I already could take care of myself because that was the point, was to take care of myself. And then I entered Kajikembo. So
why are your parents against you doing martial arts?
Well, they were poor. They couldn't afford it. So one was money. And then the second one, my mother was a Jehovah's Witness, or is, she's still alive. And she was totally against anything that had to do with violence. So she pretty much, her philosophy was she wanted me to just let them jump me, I guess, until they got tired of beating me up. And that wasn't exactly and then by my dad, on the other hand, he took me to the side. He's like, hey, let me show you some basics. He was, they're both Puerto Rican. My dad being brought up in Puerto Rico, a lot of fighting going on. So he was just like, hey, here's how you throw a jab. Here's how you throw a straight. Here's just some really rudimentary. If a guy comes, you can punch him in the nuts, and just really straightforward. No, it wasn't self-defense. He never did any type of training at all. It was just stuff that he picked up from defending himself in Puerto Rico. So I grabbed that, applied it. And then I thought boxing was the best until my cousin, who read Jeet Kune Do books, was like, let's spar. And I was like, all right, let's spar. And I was like, all right. So we put the gloves on, and he had what I thought were the funny, how back in the 90s, they had those funny looking boots. They still use them in point sparring and karate, but they had those funny looking boots, right? And I'm like, what the fuck are you wearing moon boots for, bro? Like, I thought you said we're going to spar. Like, he's like, this is so when I kick you, you don't get hurt. And I'm like, whatever. So like I came in for a jab straight, and he popped me with a cross step side kick. And I didn't even see it coming. And I was like, maybe there's something going on with this karate shit. Cause that's what I was thinking at the time. So yeah, that was like maybe 13, 14. And that's when I started thinking that that there should be more, that I should do more. And that's when I started like reading the books and stuff. But yeah, that's my disclaimer about JKD. And so you mentioned that you were 25 when you started with JKD. And then you've mentioned this before, rapid harness. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. So with Filipino martial arts, which people call FMA, there's three words commonly used. So a screamer, or to be in a screamador, is the old word, and these all essentially mean the stick fighting, stick and knife that you see from originating out of the Philippines. Kali, which is the commonly used American word, which it's not to say it is American, it's just most commonly used in America. So Guru Dan would be using that. And then Arnis, which I may sometimes say is Arnis, but apparently it should be pronounced Arnis, is what's most widely used in the Philippines, and we use for our group. Rapid Arnis is just it's the term and the branding. I think it was to illustrate that, they're trying to be fast and aggressive, really. But Pat O'Malley created Rapid Arnis. So in London is, I guess, the most famous martial artist maybe in the UK is a guy called Bob Breen. and he is based very near me in Hackney. I've only actually ever trained with him once, and the reason for that is primarily, I guess, it's loyalty to my instructor in JKD, and the Bob Breen's group train on the same days as we do, and I'm aligned to this Wednesday night group. But Bob Breen's an incredibly credible, an excellent martial artist, and really does teach some fantastic stuff. Follow everything that he does, etc., etc. So Bob had a martial arts school probably when they weren't very common. Going back to he probably had it in 70s or 80s, and he was like a karate champion, and he was the first person to bring Danny Inosanto over to the UK, and therefore has a reputation for JKD and Carly. Does some excellent boxing stuff. 4D combat is his system at the moment, which is a kind of just a branding thing over those various martial techniques that he teaches. So Pat was kind of like running his gym for him. Pat, I think then spawned off to do his own thing and to focus on the martial arts, on the harness. So he'd basically gone over to the Philippines numerous times to train with every grandmaster, which is quite a real adventure. Going over in say the 80s to train with these guys, you maybe wouldn't have had quite the infrastructure that you have now over there, and you're kind of trying to work out from all these different people what the common threads are, what makes their system unique. They're much like karate, I suppose, that there's the harness sort of, it branches out from the different islands, so it's evolved into these different systems. Some of it might be, say Balintawak, for example, which is kind of symbolized by a bull. There's a Balintawak street, which is really narrow, really narrow alley essentially, and therefore you couldn't swing a big stick in quite the same way. So they had if you think of the horns of the bull, you're kind of dropping your weight into your opponent and etc. So Pat was going around training all of these guys, and then brought that into his own system, which has gone through a lot of iterations over the years. Pat was he was a 3-time world champion fighting over there. And in those days, the Team GB used to send out very competitive, strong teams. And essentially no one could beat him. So he was actually asked to no longer compete and to be like a coach, because he was just going to keep winning tournaments over and over again. And that felt like it probably wasn't the right answer. He was very OCD about his training.
I don't mean to interrupt. What was he competing in?
So this was Arnis or Eskrima. The competition format is essentially, it's a live stick, and you're wearing body armor, and it's scored by judges. Best of 3 rounds essentially. You can get a draw. You'll get whacked a lot, and it's making good clean hits. That's essentially where you win your points, and good defense, etc. It's same sort of kind of system as boxing. I think they score it on a sort of 10-9 per round, but I might be wrong.
So it's pretty much you're wearing body armor, kind of like kendo armor, if I'm not mistaken. With the you got the cage.
Not too dissimilar, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
then the way.
And you sit there and you whack each other with sticks. Yeah. Just a general principle for people that might be listening or don't have any idea how this works. You're whacking each other with sticks. Clean hits count up. Boxing style is points. Is there knockouts?
Yeah, there may be. So you can still punch someone. As I say, they've got this helmet on. You can still punch them in their in the grill, so to speak. Basically, yeah.
Okay. Can you kick? Is there kicking?
Yeah, you can do anything you want.
Okay. So is there submissions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah.
How much is there?
I'll be straight and say it's a format that I've not fought in that much.
Yeah,
like,
just to get a general, idea of what he was asked to no longer compete, and that's what I'm trying to.
Yeah.
He was asked to never, to stop competing because he kept winning, and I'm just trying to get an idea for people that don't understand that art and how they work. And again, as you know, with tournaments, every rules change according to referees, but again, just for a basic, there's striking, there's grappling. How much ground time do they have?
So you would only go to ground if you were taken to ground, or if you took someone down to the ground, and you would be seeking that submission. I mean, what you're being judged on your ability to fight with weapons. They don't particularly want to see you rolling around, I suppose trying to stab or hit someone on the ground. It's advantageous to be, standing up. It's mainly a stand-up art.
Okay, and that's all I want to clear up. Like, it's not like MMA with sticks. That's it's not like it's not like MMA with sticks. You can't like double leg someone to the ground and then start working a choke or something like that. They're looking more at them standing, but they do allow submissions and they do allow the takedown. But the emphasis is stand up.
Yeah. So, the reason I'm being inarticulate is because that is a format that I haven't experienced that much. So when I'm learning harness, we don't focus on these kind of tournament competitions, and they can be a bit flowery and a bit like, you're tapping someone a million times, but that person's still coming forwards because the body armor's protecting them. So it's not a format that necessarily we feel is like a realistic reflection of what fighting might be with weapons.
Are you talking shit, Tom?
It's the national sport of the Philippines, although a lot of Filipinos don't really realize that. I mean, they love basketball out there, for example.
Yeah, they don't. That was one of my shocks. Was I had a Filipino student come out here that I train in Kobe, and I asked him, he was doing Gukaji Kembo and he wanted to do MMA. He still wants to do MMA, and he's had a few fights. But I asked him, like, hey, have you ever heard of Eskrima? He's like, no. Have you ever heard of FMA? He's like, no. Maybe I'm using the wrong word. Have you heard of Kali? He's like, I don't know. Like, all right. What martial arts have you heard of in the Philippines? And he's like, boxing. Like, that's your basic boxing, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I was really kind of surprised that he never heard of it. And then when I looked into it, I guess the families are very protective of the FMA, and the FMA practitioners in the Philippines are very protective of the art, I guess, and they don't exactly.
Yeah. So the history of it was the Spanish invaded the Philippines and ruled there for something stupid like 300 years. The Filipinos, in order to continue to practice their weapon fighting skills and, to give them that potential to have, for an uprising, would perform these kind of dances with sticks. And the way they were moving the sticks was, of course, the same way that they would move a machete. So the stick became a sort of training format for continuing to maintain their martial arts. Now, some of that has died down a little bit in terms of the introduction of guns. So it's quite easy, as I understand it, in the Philippines to hire someone to go and kill someone else. So you will have these sort of assassins knocking around who, whether it's with a knife or with a gun, will happily go and kill someone. Dossi Perez HQ, which is where we were training, I believe Juni Kanyeti, who I interviewed while I was over there, who's kind of like the current head of that system, he adapted, he created the body armor and the tournament format such that it could be taught in schools, such that this bit of history wasn't lost. So that's where the tournament stuff comes from.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I saw a special on, I came across a video on Facebook that talked about how they're trying to revive FMA in the Philippines, and there was a whole documentary on that. So if anybody is interested in that, I would look into it. So
it's probably bigger outside of the Philippines now.
that's what that's kind of the, I mean, I don't know much about it, but that's the impression I'm getting from the martial artists that I do know. It seems to be like really big, more big outside the Philippines than actually in the Philippines. But back to you. you got into this harness system. When did you get into this harness system? How old were you when you started doing that?
So let me tell you my funny story of like how I really got into that, which I was going to say earlier on. So I'm doing my JKD, and I've started going over to America to these camps, and I've turned up 3 consecutive years to these camps, and it's 2011. So I've done 3 days of pretty hardcore training, and at that time the Wednesday night group was really going strong. So we had like 100 people at these seminars, gigantic hall of everyone training pretty hard, great associations with some really strong MMA clubs and things like that. So at the end, much to my surprise, I get called up and they say, right, we're giving you I think apprentice instructorship. It's like the lowest ranking instructorship they had. And I was really quite buzzing from that. It made my weekend, so to speak. So I went back to the UK, I told my 2 best friends, and I told my instructor. And I could tell in my instructor's voice that he wasn't comfortable with that. As in, and with the benefit of hindsight, it's like, well, he would want to give me an apprentice instructorship, and there's a process and a reason that the things happen this way. So the USA, which was very informal at the time, and the UK, which was like more formal, and JKD is typically informal, but had this sort of like gap. So his instructor then calls me up later that day and said, look, they shouldn't really have given you that. You haven't done enough hours. And I kind of listened to all this and took it in, and I was quite frustrated to hear this, to say the least. So for about 3 weeks after that, I was like, fuck JKD, this is bollocks. Like, and to be honest, then I remind myself, look, I'm not in this for certificates. I'm not in this for instructorships. I wasn't even looking to teach. But when they gave me that certificate, I was like, actually, this is something I want to do. So I went back, I spoke to my instructor, and we talked about doing the kind of gradings that we had in the UK to get to being instructor level such that could be reinstated. So that was, so I went back to normal sort of thing. And then it gets to 2014 and nothing's happened, right? So this was 2011, 2014, I'm still, and to be honest, my progress, I was training so much, like in terms of I would go and train with other people and I was developing, but I felt that my training in London wasn't really going anywhere. And as I say, I would meet these people around the rest of the world who had skills that I didn't have. And I'd met in a knife defense seminar, I'd met Pat O'Malley and I'd been amazed by some of his skill. Kind of like the fast hands, the trapping, the locking. Really, yeah, I was pretty blown away. So I kept an eye out for his stuff, and I saw this instructor program being advertised, and I embarked on it. And it was a big commitment. So it was 1 weekend a month for 5 years. But the idea was at the end of each year, you would be able to. So at the end of the first year, I'll be able to teach up to green, second year up to blue, third year up to brown, fourth year up to black. And then the end of the 5th year, I would be a full instructor. So I could have abandoned it, because taking on anything for 5 years is such a big commitment. But whilst I had a little wobble at the end of that first year about whether I came back for the second year. And I remember going up there and my skills had deteriorated because we'd had like a kind of big Christmas break. And I was like, oh, what have I done signing up for this for another year? It's such a big commitment. And I managed to get through that and I never looked back. And it was, it improved me so much as a martial artist. I think that, if I think when I initially took up JKD, that was a big boost. When I took up boxing, that really made my movement in JKD so much better. And I think that is why when I went to that, when I got given that apprentice instructorship in Miami, in Florida, that was a reflection of how well I was moving, which was mainly thanks to the boxing. And then I was training with these other people around the world. It wasn't consistent enough for me to continue to go up those levels. So starting that instructor program then gave me that other boost to get to the level that I'm at now, which I would say is, a very good all-round fighter, except groundwork. So I can do all the takedowns, I can do all the locking, that sort of thing. But I'm not a great ground fighter. I can hold people off, but I can rarely submit them. And I guess I have a debate in my mind of, do I take on a ground fighting art at 39 that, could potentially give me injuries, or do I continue, do I just focus on the things I'm already good at and some of the occupational stuff that I'm taking on as well?
Well, I guess I have a few questions for you. So I have many. But one of the questions I kind of, after listening to you talk, I guess I have some questions. This is, okay, so you got into RNIS when you entered that other program, is that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And then from there, I have questions about JKD itself. Because I think, so one of the things I always talk about Kaju Kembo is about how each Kaju Kembo school has the liberty to do and teach what they want. And so once you become a Kaju Kembo instructor, there are no real rules. Like, as long as you don't fuck with any of the other people, like you can pretty much do whatever you want, which is, as you saw with Hackelman, he created his own Hawaiian Kempo system that focused more on MMA and striking. And he got rid of all the kata. While some guys will go a completely different route. Like, I'm going to add more kata and be all about Kung Fu and go get an instructor certificate in Kung Fu. And now people that I train can have a black belt in Kaju Kembo and a certificate in Wushu Kung Fu, which is something my instructor's instructor did. In JKD, how does that work? Like, one of my biggest, I'm puzzled because, like I said, I've only read the books. I've only read Bruce Lee's books, but I never really went into a JKD school. And I remember something in there that said at one point, I think it's in the first few pages of the book, it said that he says that if you want to enter a kun or dojo, you can, but you don't have to, right? And like his philosophy was more or less, you can enter a school, but you don't have to. And he also said that JKD is not a style. So it was a method. So like, fast forward to now, JKD is a huge organization. Hopefully you don't get in trouble answering this question. but how does it work? Like, you also mentioned belts. So like somewhere in there, there's a belt system, I guess. How's that work?
Yeah. So right. So I personally think, right, everyone's biggest strengths are also often their biggest weaknesses. And I'll give that to certain systems as well. So with JKD in the Wednesday night group, it's something that evolved out of Tim Tackett's garage. Well, Danny Nosanto's garage to Tim Tackett's garage. And it has an informal nature that, as I say, when I was kind of in my early days and kind of against traditional martial arts, and now I've grown where I'm a little bit more pro traditional martial arts, that informality was great for me. And then where I got frustrated with that is, say, for example, when I was saying, look, I want to be an instructor now. You've taken this certificate away from me. Fair enough. Now I want to go and earn that certificate. What do I have to do? And it just wasn't entirely clear. And there was a syllabus that was being used in the UK, but it was like, when are we focusing on that? And there was like rules like, oh, it wouldn't be shared with me. I couldn't like just see the whole thing written down. Now that's like that was a personal choice at the time. Right, I might that might be a bit to cut out, to be fair. But I've lost my way slightly. I was saying about the sort of informality piece. We didn't really have the weaknesses of the Wednesday night group staff is basically at some stage they just say, you're good enough, here's an instructorship. And that may be based on a number of factors, including who is giving you that. So some people are more lenient. They're obviously going to be more lenient to the people that they like the most, or the people that are like sort of giving them something in return. So you have this variation in standards. And it's something that we've talked about addressing, and I'm trying to help. Like, I've drafted a syllabus. But with JKD, you do want that level of informality. You do want that garage. So it's getting the right balance between the two. So in London, because we followed the syllabus of my instructor's instructor, he had one that goes up to black belt. Now, JKD, Bruce Lee was against traditional martial arts and against gradings and against belts. Yeah. So some people, like when I posted, like I was given my sort of second degree in terms of like I was given a black belt and like formally recognised for the stuff that I'd done, and we posted that online. A guy from the East Coast of America kind of was a bit of a troll on Facebook and kind of said, like, you know, there are no belts in JKD, that you shouldn't be doing that. And in fairness, I think he had a point, but the timing, choosing to say that when I've been given this thing, that's not the time to criticize the use of belts.
Well, to be fair, they're all trolls on social media. They're all
so we do currently have a belt system for our JKD in absence of anything better. And what I'm trying to do with this syllabus update, where I'm kind of helping the Wednesday night group, should they choose to use it. So it's taken me a great deal of time to pull that together, because I've looked at lots of different sources, put everything in a 9-rank system, which is the same system as Bruce used. So there isn't belts as such, but you know, you would know in order to get rank 1, these are the criteria that you need to fulfill. What was I going to say? Yeah, I'm marking out what has to be done for those to achieve those things. And as I say, we need something to assess someone is improving, and you know, this is the standard they're up to, and these are the things they need to know. And at the moment, that happens to be a sort of a black belt rank.
Okay, so how many ranks are there? Like, for example, in Kajikembo, and the one that I remember what I just mentioned, my Kavet, my Kajikembo is different from other people's Kajikembo. In Kajikembo, there is a little bit of bickering sometimes about a person getting a black belt in whatever way that they end up getting a black belt. But at the end of the day, as long as they don't do something crazy, like self-proclaim themselves to be a great grandmaster, not naming any names, but that did happen recently. And everybody was like, well, wait. Wait, because like in our system, we only have one founder. His name was Sijo Adriano Imperato. After he died, he said, there can be no other Sijo. I take this title to my grave type of deal. So no one else can have that. And recently, someone jumped on and he's like, I'm Sijo Mr. Smith, right? And all of us all kind of looked at each other like, we don't really try not to talk shit about whatever you do, whatever rank you have. The only thing we'll make a big deal about is if you try to take the great grandmaster who founded the system, who passed away, if you try to take his title, that's the only time that we really make a big deal about anything. But in our system, we pretty much, and the one that I was taught and the one that we do, it's white, yellow, orange, purple, blue, green, brown, and then black. So like there's 8 stages, if you will. How is in your system? How many belts, I guess, there are? How many stages?
I don't want to focus on that too much, but I'll briefly talk to it. So in terms of the Rapid Harness one, it's white, yellow, green, 2 blues, 2 browns, black, and then red.
Okay.
So red is the instructor belt, but it's also referred to as your senior black. And the reason it's red is, one, red is a very important color in the Philippines. So in the Philippines flag, there's kind of a red and blue corner, and when they're at war, they flip those up and down. So the red refers to war, the blue refers to peace. So if they're at war, they sort of turn that up the other way. And most of the martial arts, most of the practitioners will wear a sort of red suit. The other elements of it was, one, Pat felt everyone should spill blood for their red belt, so hence red. And finally, Pat just thought it'd be funny that if there was a tournament and his fighters were going up against other people's black belts, and they were like, this guy's only a red belt, but they didn't realize that actually that's the highest rank. That might be quite an amusing outcome. So for that system, I think everything is crystal clear. As I say, for the JKD, at the moment in JKD London, we follow a numerous level system. I think it might be as high as 15. Yeah. And the future state for the Wednesday night group is to have this 9-rank system, and then you go into the instructor ranks. So it's 9 student ranks and then instructor ranks. And they start, it's basic. The first 3 are basic, next 3 are intermediate, next 3 are advanced student, and then we have the instructor ranks, which kind of start with this sort of apprentice level and then go to like associate instructor, full instructor, and then we're talking about having a sort of professor being at the top level. But in terms of like the names, so out of respect, we'll use the term Sifu, which is to indicate that person is a teacher. And in the Filipino stuff, they do have ranks like that. Pat was recently promoted to Grand Master. He used to be Tuhon, which is kind of like the leader of a tribe. So there are these sort of grandiose titles. Bruce Lee was again against the title Master because it suggests that you have totally mastered something. You know, that it's beyond reproach and you don't need to do any better. So again, you know, when it comes to titles, it's not a massive thing in JKD. I find in martial arts as a whole, it's obviously full of ego, and having these grand names for someone, you know, one of the biggest problems with martial arts is standards, right? So you might have like a really weak karate system where, you know, we've all seen these videos of black belts who are just absolutely terrible from certain systems, doing like terrible kicks, and they can't even punch. And then you compare them to one of these systems where the instructor basically never gives rank, and he's like, look, my guys at blue belt are unbelievable, and that's probably true, but it's because the standards are all over the place. And I don't ever foresee a time where you can reliably compare one system to another or one art to another. But for want of doing so, it's useful to know someone has a black belt. That, you know, if that's the gold standard and we say it's black belt equivalent, we kind of understand that person's at the top of that system.
Well, BJJ guys would beg to differ as far as not comparing systems. but
BJJ is a really interesting example, right? So, BJJ, and if I go pro BJJ, right, it's the volume of people studying it denotes quality. If you have that many people doing something, then you're going to have more high quality practitioners, more high quality instructors. The next thing I think is excellent about BJJ is typically those guys spend more time on the mats and more time sparring. So the more you actively do something, and like I'm guilty of this sometimes, and lots of people will say, well, I've studied martial arts for like 15 years, but there's other people who've done 5 years. You know, Conor McGregor has done more in 1 year than I would have done in my 15 years of martial arts. That's just the reality. So, you know, time served isn't a good indicator of quality. And then also it's like, what are the quality of those reps? Like, were you training with someone who was, you know, with low intensity, with a poor training partner who couldn't hold pads, et cetera, or were you training with someone who was better than you and constantly sparring? So BJJ guys, as I say, they're on the ground fighting all the time. Now, some BJJ systems, and I have friends who instruct this, they will give out an instructorship based on when you're ready. So it's as long as a piece of string, which I hate. I really think that's an unfair way of doing things. But one day they will say, you're good enough. I've seen enough of you to say you're worthy of having a black belt or whatever other belt. Other systems have a set criteria. So you've fulfilled this criteria. Now you're getting promoted and you get tested in order to do that. And then you have a final category of systems where it's based on tournament winning, and even that has its weaknesses. So if someone gets in these BJJ systems gets promoted, it's because they've been successful at a tournament. They've beaten all the other blue belts and all the other brown belts and all the other black belts. The trouble with that is, and I have this, I'm not an expert in BJJ, I get this secondhand from other people talking about BJJ, is that you have the equivalent of being a bandit in golf. So people stay at white belt, stay at blue belt, stay at brown belt for too long so that they can accumulate these tournament wins. And then when you go into their school, you see there's trophies everywhere. Well, the trophies come from being a bandit and fighting people that aren't as good as you. So my point simply being that, there is no universal standard in martial arts. We always look for the best person in our town. And if the best person in your town is teaching a system that maybe you don't particularly buy into, like karate, well, you still ought to do karate rather than go to maybe the FMA school that has a terrible teacher.
Yeah, and again, like when you're talking about the standards, I was joking, by the way. I cross-trained in BJJ, and that can be I've done a completely other. I've had black belt meetings with other practitioners about that, but yeah, I always joke around about that because I think right now it's all about. I think my instructor has been doing martial arts for a really long time, and he was telling me and teaching for a long time, and he told me that in the 70s. It was all about karate, and then Bruce Lee came on the scene and everybody wanted to do what Bruce Lee was doing. And then in the 80s, it became about kickboxing, and karate kind of made a comeback. And then in the 90s, the UFC started, and then that's when he kind of feels like, as far as the public eye, that there's always kind of a focus or trend. Like there's always like the trendy martial art, right? And then right now I feel BJJ is the one. But
it's a marketing exercise, isn't it?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if I think of something like Krav Maga, well, Krav Maga is, when I see it, you have a lot of people who are essentially like security guards covered in tattoos, very bulky, skinheads. They look cool, and the outfits they'll wear a pair of combat trousers and a cool t-shirt and stuff like that. And that is very easy to buy into. But equally, my experience of Krav Maga is often people see it as like sort of a shortcut. So they're not willing to learn a full-time system. They want to go and have realistic training experiences. So for me, the value of Krav Maga is in the drills, but not so much in the technique, because the technique is borrowed from other things. So it's when they're doing knees and elbows, that's Muay Thai. Go. I would go and learn Muay Thai and spend the time investing into that. That's Krav. I think if I go back to BJJ, as I say, a BJJ brown belt is of an incredible standard. I've never seen a BJJ brown belt that isn't pretty amazing, and I am coming that from a guy who isn't amazing at groundwork. So to me, all people who are good at groundwork are probably pretty good. But as I say, the standards are so high. But when I've trained BJJ, I've been left frustrated because I've gone and said why wouldn't I do that? Oh, you're not allowed to do that. And then people will sell it as being an amazing form of self-defense. And with my JKD filter on, I'm well, why would I'm training in this gi? Well, that's not going to happen in real life. I'm training with a desire to be on the ground. Which the ground could have glass all over it, and that I'm not training for multi-man scenarios. So, the reality is getting kicked or punched in the head becomes very likely. I was trained very briefly with a judo guy who was teaching my instructor, and the guy couldn't punch. And the thought of doing a martial art and not being able to punch is just insane for me. I don't care how well you can roll or submit someone, you should be able to punch. Now, equally, there's people like Jocko Willink, who's Navy SEAL, tough guy, who's a massive fan of BJJ, and his argument is, look, you need to be able to get up off the ground, you need to be able to escape when someone's grabbed hold of you, and you ought to be able to submit someone and that kind of thing. And he's far more of a warrior than I am. So maybe I shouldn't question it as much. But for me, BJJ isn't that high on my list of things to study. And I'd probably, if I was to study a ground fighting system, albeit it's hard to find over here, I'd probably go for catch wrestling. This is when I've trained with those guys, it's like, wow, this is much more realistic and there's a lot less rules.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, again, I was kind of surprised when I started getting into BJJ, and the guy I trained with didn't know how to punch, knew rudimentary how to punch, had no idea how to kick, and coincidentally got into BJJ because he liked MMA. So it was really interesting to see someone who, when I got his story, he's Japanese, so when I got his story, he got into BJJ because he wanted to get into, because he liked MMA. He didn't want to get into it because he was older when he started. He was 38 when he started his BJJ journey, and now he's in his 50s. But when he started, it was because of MMA. But it was interesting to me that the mindset, you got into this because you liked MMA, but you never learned how to punch or kick, but you felt that BJJ was MMA because what you saw, Helio, was it Helio? I think it was Helio or Royce. Helio Gracie, right? He was the one from UFC 1, right? Helio. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I did occasionally watch those old videos where it's my style versus your style, but I've only really watched the UFC on a really regular basis since it's become this kind of modern format where everyone's doing vaguely the same thing.
I'm just going to make sure I didn't fuck up the name here. Sorry. Royce Gracie. Sorry. Royce Gracie. It was Royce Gracie for UFC 1 that put BJJ on the map. It was Royce. And but if you look at Royce, again, he had a good mixed background. So kind of fast forward, the evolution of the art started becoming less striking. But one question I had for you about, and I know I keep asking you JKD questions because I'm just curious. Sure, how many JKD orgs are there?
It's impossible to say, and people apply the term JKD to a lot of things that aren't JKD.
Okay. Just a rough estimate. How's that? We're not going to say official or unofficial. If you just throw a number out there.
I literally couldn't say. I mean, essentially, to be doing JKD, there should be a lineage up to Bruce Lee. So most people will therefore come through Dan Inosanto because he was the only person that Bruce Lee said, you can teach JKD. And to be fair, he didn't want Dan to teach JKD. He wanted him to focus on his FMA. So that then obviously spills down to lots of different groups. But as I say, people may not have that lineage. They might be like a Krav Maga school and they'll write for the sake of drawing more people into their school, but they may reference JKD.
Just officially without pissing off too many people, how many would you say are legit? How many legit organizations would you say are out there? 50?
1 in 10.
1 in 10. Okay. I was gonna say 50 or 40, but that's it. Because I don't know. Okay.
For anyone who's wondering, I'm at a school and they're telling me I'm teaching JKD, but I'm not sure whether it is.
Okay.
Right. First, apply the bullshit filter. So say, does this look like it works? Right. That's your first thing. Then do a little bit of research into JKD and the principles. Right. So is it simple? Is it direct? And if the things that you're doing are not conforming to these principles, is it strong side forward? So we fight with if you're right-handed, you'll fight with your right side forwards rather than an orthodox stance with your weaker hand forwards, right? So if you compare what you're doing versus this list of principles, does it line up? And then finally, and the reason why I say I would come to this one last, because I don't think it bears true all the time, is watch a Bruce Lee film or two and maybe see whether you move vaguely like Bruce Lee. Now, the reason why I say I come to that one last is because one of the things that so JKD is about self-expression. It's about making, fighting the way that suits you best. What a lot of people want to do when they study JKD is emulate Bruce Lee and fight the way Bruce fights. But if he's like a little 140-pound guy who's incredibly athletic, if you're like, 200 pounds, 250, 300 pounds, right? Your JKD is going to be very different. You will, a big guy is going to crash the line, whereas a small guy is going to dance around their opponent. And if you don't understand those principles and your instructors aren't drawing you towards finding out what works for you and are telling you, do this, do that, religiously without explaining why, then you should be questioning whether that school's the right place for you. And I say that you could probably apply a similar approach to different martial arts, but that's relatively specific to JKD, referencing Bruce and the principles.
Yeah, I think that's one of the questions I always ask, usually towards the end of my interviews, like, what do you recommend for someone getting into martial arts? And yeah, that can be applied to any school, really. That can be applied to any school. We're almost close to the wrap up here, Tom, but I still want to ask you a few more questions about your journey here. Have you ever competed? What did you compete in, if you have?
No, I haven't. Right. So in terms of like the purpose of doing martial arts, right? People will do martial arts for a different reason. So it may be to compete in the ring and experience that success. It may be to avenge a bullying situation or just to make sure that never happens to them. I think for me it is if I saw something bad happening in public, or if for example someone tried to rob me at a cash point or whatever it might be, that I would be able to absolutely pulverize them. And the same as if I saw that attacking a loved one or just someone kind of in the street. It's about right and wrong and being able to protect myself and not sort of like live in fear or anything like that. So the tournament thing hasn't been a massive driver for me. I've been drawn to JKD, which isn't aimed at ring fighting. So JKD is a shoe art. So we wear shoes. And if for example, you're wearing like a military style boot or, hard-soled shoes, when we're doing like a snap kick, kick to like a knee joint, we're trying to break that joint. So the aim for us is to end a fight as quickly as possible. So in a kind of tournament scenario, ending things as quick as possible is a rarity. Like McGregor on Aldo, it doesn't happen very often. So JKD doesn't lend itself to being a tournament fighting. Once you add gloves and protective equipment, it doesn't have quite the same effect as it might do in the street. With the FMA, as I say, there's a tournament format out there that exists, which we elaborated on before. But again, for my purposes, am I looking to like win a medal in one of these tournaments, or am I looking to make sure that if someone does draw a knife on me, that I could deal with that? Well, it's more down that angle. Like I like doing weapons-based work, but in the UK, I can't carry a knife. Certainly can't carry a gun or get my hands on a gun. So really, I'm trying to work those defensive attributes. Obviously, I enjoy it, and we do a lot of like stick and knife sparring. So we'll do, I guess what we do most is a padded stick rather than a live stick and body armor. We do no armor with a padded stick and a fencing helmet. So you get some really tasty bruises from sparring. But yeah, you're getting that realistic simulation of feeling like, you know, this blunt padded stick or for stabbing, or a stick hitting you.
Okay, so you're saying that it's different people have different paths, right? Like you mentioned earlier.
100%.
Some people get into martial arts, they're more about combatives, and that's all they want to do is combatives. They only want to deal with knife and gun and weapons. Some people get into it for the beauty of it, and they get into something like kung fu, and they love the katas, and some people get into it because they really want to compete. And that's all they want to do is they either want to do like something like MMA or they want to do a lot of no-gi or whatever that is. So, and again, it's not to say that I don't put value on which path people take. I've gone just about everywhere when in my path, but what I would like to see more what I'd like to see less of is people coming from different styles criticizing other people's journeys, because I think that's bullshit. Because like if anything, there's not that many martial artists in the general population. I was talking about this in my last podcast that I'm going to release pretty soon with Sensei Tom Bowers. And the idea is that we're all martial artists, and if we can focus on that point more than the other stuff that divides us, like whether or not we agree with the way something's being taught or not, there's more to unify us than divide us. And there's not that many of us in general, like when you look at it. But yeah, I think that pretty much answers my question. I guess
I was just going to say, I think, you know, and it may sound like I've been critical of Krav Maga or BJJ. I'm also trying to be balanced and say, you know, look, the Krav Maga guy is doing a lot of real world drills. You know, Hackelman was referring to Hick's law in terms of like your ability to perform gross motor movement is going to be far better in a fighting scenario than sort of like, you know, minute level skill on your podcast. And, you know, those guys are focusing on those things. Someone swings a knife or a bat at you, and they get a lot of real world, you know, multi-man scenarios, weapons, etc. That for me is the real strength of Krav. BJJ, it's about the volume of training they're doing, the quality of the teaching, the quality of the opponent. And you know, I have said I don't think it's the most realistic in terms of like real world fighting, which would go back to the Krav point. You know, JKD, the formality, the informality is great. But you know, in my JKD, we rarely use weapons. We rarely did groundwork. So I had these two big gaps in my skill set. With the FMA, it's like it's maybe more realistic for the Philippines, where every single person carries a knife. Like, and you know, there's a lot of those kind of micro. I think I forget the right term for it, but like the kind of small level of skills like locking, etc. You can do some really impressive flowery stuff when the pressure's off, but are you going to be able to do that in a, you know, high intensity thing when there's a few guys attacking you with weapons? So probably not.
Yeah, I think again it's a personal journey thing. Like I think one of the things that I see, I'm not married to any ideas. It either works or it doesn't. And I think that was one of the things that I respected a lot when I was reading the JKD book, was the idea, if it works, keep it. If it doesn't, don't. It's really that simple. And I don't care what style. If I see something that I like, I'll keep it. If I see something that I don't like, it doesn't work for me, maybe I'll keep it in my back pocket because maybe it'll work for someone else that I'm teaching down the line. But there's a lot of stuff I throw out. I throw away out of my own system that later get brought back to me. Like I threw out the idea of using staff training. I was like, you know what? Honestly, I don't like using a bow staff. It's not really my thing. I'll practice it once a week. I'll do the kata once a week just so it's there. So I have the basics, but I'm honestly not going to focus on it. And then recently I had a student who told me, I don't want to sound like a LARPer. I know I heard you talking about LARPers and I don't want to sound like one, but I really want to learn how to use a bow staff. And I hope so he essentially felt like I was going to shame him for him wanting to use a staff. And I was like, hey, I'm not trying to shame you. If you want to learn staff basics, I know some. And that's why I'm glad I kept it in my back pocket. I personally didn't work for me. I didn't like it for myself, but I'm glad I kept it in my back pocket because a student did ask me for it, and now I have something I can show them. So
one of the important things for me about martial arts is you're keeping a sense of play into your later years. So I'm meeting up with all my friends and we're kind of fighting each other, right? And then at the end, it's kind of, you're always like, thanks, man. And it builds a certain bond. And I think like when you get into adult life, you don't do enough fun, play kind of things. And provided you're open about, I am doing this bit of skill, like the bow staff bit, because I enjoy it, right? It doesn't have, not everything has to be about being the most effective, deadly weapon that you can possibly be. There is something to be said from doing something just for the pure enjoyment or the skill art of it. Just don't get those things confused with being an amazing fighter.
Yeah. So we're almost done here. I have again, in honor of your podcast, I don't have that many quick fire questions, but I do have one. I have two. Top 3 80s action movies, because you told me that you really liked 80s action movies earlier. So now I'm dying to know, what are your top 3 80s martial arts movies?
I would have to do martial arts. I'm not so good on the martial arts films.
We can do action. We can do action then. Top 3 80s action.
I'm going to go with Aliens, Terminator 2, but I know that's like something like 91, so that's kind of cheating. So maybe I'll go for the Terminator.
Okay.
What other ones? Thinking of things like Total Recall and stuff like that, but I don't know. Struggling. Yeah, I'm not sure.
We could do 90s. We can go in the 90s.
I'm trying to think what things am I always watching.
You're only missing one. So Aliens, Terminator 2.
You have to cut this out. Top Gun. Let's go Top Gun.
Okay, Top Gun. All right. Before I ask you the next quick fire question, do you keep up with comic books at all?
No.
Not at all. Okay.
No.
All right. So that eliminates.
What I would say about my view on sort of those sort of fantasy characters is they must be grounded in reality. So I've never been interested in a Superman.
Okay.
Because he has just too much powers.
Okay.
The regular guy.
Okay. All right. So you know enough. It's not, if I asked you a question, you would at least know the characters I'm talking about. So I guess all right, Batman versus
Batman and the Punisher.
Okay, cool. Batman versus Punisher. Who wins?
Batman.
Why?
Because he's got more kit.
Good. Okay. All right. Good. All right. Yeah. And those are my quick fire questions. Tom, if people want to, well, I know we have the whole COVID thing, but we'll throw that to the side. In a regular world, after this shit is over with, where can people find you on, or do you want people to find you on social media? I guess is the first question. Are you okay with that?
So if anyone does want to reach me, it's Tom McGrath on Facebook or Instagram. In terms of the podcast, I thought I'll talk briefly about the podcast. So if you're listening to this, you probably like martial arts. We've done 100 shows, and our podcast is called Primal Radio. Me and a guy called Jim McCann. Jim McCann suffers from bipolar, and when COVID broke out, he kind of went off the radar, and I frankly haven't spoken to him since March, which is frustrating because I don't really know what's going on with him. I carried on doing the show, but it has lost its momentum. But there's 100 great episodes there. I may come back to doing more. I've had some discussions with one of our guests, Art Kaysen, of the show, about doing another podcast, which might have a bit more of a kind of combatives element. And please check those out. And we do have a website at the moment, which is primalradio.net as well.
All right, cool. If people want to train, you said you're teaching, right?
I'm not at the moment. So
okay.
Glancing back to your podcast, and you said at the end how once you're a black belt, you have a kind of obligation to be don't stop your journey there. And I kind of promised myself I never would, but in a way I have. And to expand upon that, so in April 2019, so not that long ago, I joined the Army Reserves over here. And that's become such a big part of my life that it's kind of taken over a bit from the martial arts. That's not to say that I'm not coming back to the martial arts. It's not to say that I never do anything. But in terms of my intensity, which was like training all the time, my training has gone towards the army stuff. So I have certain goals and ambitions that I want to achieve in that world. And I guess I also maybe started to question a bit with the purpose of martial arts, going back to that point of like, if I have these powers, if you will, you talked about people's Spider-Man powers and origin stories and things like that, to not use those for like a greater good. And if I feel that I am in some way a warrior, which I think most martial artists do, should I be using that, to a larger extent, whether that be military, police or something like that? So, I've joined at a relatively old age. Most of my colleagues are younger than me, and I've been training, real hard in terms of like the mileage I'm putting on the clock with, carrying like 20 kilos or more, and trying to achieve certain things. So martial arts wise, I haven't been doing that much. And right now over here in the UK, thanks to COVID lockdown, all the gyms are closed, and really training's become, I won't say an impossibility, but certainly training with others is an impossibility right now. But I will be back picking up those sticks, knives, and boxing gloves in the not too distant future.
I'll be back. Yeah, there's a call back there. All right. Well, again, for my listeners, definitely check out his Primal Radio podcast. It's an awesome podcast. It's how I came across Tom. A lot of great martial arts journey stories there. We'll do the wrap up now. This is Social Gelo with Angelo. If you like the show, please subscribe. If you're hearing this from TuneIn Radio, FM Radio, I don't know, the thousands of radio stations that have pirated my show, please just jump off whatever app you're listening to, jump on YouTube and subscribe. That's the best way you can support the show. Anything you want to, any final thoughts? Jerry Springer, final thoughts?
I was just going to say, keep doing this, Angelo. Like I've gone through it myself in terms of like the amount of time it eats up, booking guests. Sometimes they bail on you, writing show notes, editing the podcast could kill. Sometimes it take me like 10 hours because I say and a lot, so I was going to cut that stuff out. And I've got a lot of respect for what you're doing because I've done it myself, and it's a good show. So people keep listening, keep supporting, and hopefully you'll grow in a way that we always intended to on Primal Radio.
Well, that's much appreciated, Tom. All right, y'all. You have a great one, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.